It's the early hours of the 7th of May 2005. Ex-squaddy Desmond Goddard is walking to work alone along Tarworst Road in Reading. Hearing a cry for help coming from the park, he suddenly stops in his tracks. As he focuses in the direction of the sound, he sees a figure staggering towards him. As the figure gets closer, it becomes clear it's a young woman, half-clothed and covered in blood. The terrified girl had just survived being shot in the forehead and tells him her friend Mary is dead in the park. In a 20-minute call to a 999 operator, Mr. Goddard relays the first details of a night of rape, torture and murder as the girl blurts out her story. South London drug dealer Adrian Thomas had recently moved to the Oxford Road area of Reading. In early April 2005, he rented a cheap flat in the name of Michael Brown and began dealing drugs to the local addicts. 2 weeks later, Thomas was attacked in his flat by a number of local men who robbed him of drugs and money. He retreated back to South London, nursing his pride, and told friends he'd been set up. Thomas failed to return to Reading to get his revenge on the girl he believed was responsible. In the middle of the night, he got together a group of men and drove from South London to Reading, intent on revenge. In the early hours of the morning, their car pulled up in the car park of the Wallingford Arms. They found Marianne and her friend sitting in a parked car. Marianne and her friend were dragged out of the car by their hair and bundled into the boot of the gang's car. They drove to Abbey Guest House, where Thomas had stayed previously under the name of Michael Brown. While Thomas booked in at reception, the other members of the gang manhandled the girls through the back exit and took them to room 19. By now it was around 1 a.m. Most of the room was taken up by a double bed, and as soon as the gang entered, they began laying towels down on the floor to soak up the blood. For the next 3 hours, the girls were subjected to acts of violence, including being raped at gunpoint. They were forced to smoke heroin and crack cocaine. They were stripped naked, pistol whipped, stamped on, and had boiling water mixed with sugar poured over their bodies. The girls were told they were going to go to Prospect Park and that's where they're going to die. The girls were driven to the park and led into the woods. Moments later, the gang began stabbing Marianne. She suffered a total of 40 wounds. They then turned to Marianne's friend and shot her at point-blank range. The bullet disintegrated on impact and did not penetrate her skull. She had blacked out. When she came around, it was silent. The men had left. Mary was laying next to her. She began staggering through the woods. Shortly after 5 a.m, she stumbled into the street. A passerby came to her rescue and called 999. Shortly afterwards, police found Marianne's body and a full-scale murder inquiry began, which eventually led to the gang. In court, the defendants laughed as a teenager told as she watched her friend being stabbed to death before a gun was placed to her head, and she was asked, "Are you ready to die?" The 19-year-old girl said that her friend Marianne begged for mercy as she was repeatedly stabbed as they knelt together, and that when she fell into a ball was ordered to sit up so her throat could be cut, Reading Crown Court was told. Stab wounds riddled the body of the schoolgirl, a jury was told. Puncture wounds and grazes peppered the 16-year-old's body, including a 3-inch deep slash to her neck and stab wounds in her chest which caused a collapsed lung. The court earlier heard pillowcases were placed over the head of Mary Ann and her friend. In graphic detail, she described how Mary Ann was stabbed all over the body by the 19-year-old Michael Johnson. Johnson had flown into a rage because Mary Ann would not sit up so he could slit her throat. On the 28th of April 2006, 6 men were found guilty of the murder of Mary Ann Leneghan and attempted murder of her friend whose name was never revealed. They were also convicted of kidnap, false imprisonment and rape. Adrian Thomas, Michael Johnson, Jamal Morley, Joshua Morley, Llewellyn Adams and Kosovan refugee Ingrid Kreniski were all sentenced to life in prison at Reading Crown Court.